Welcome to Omni Love TV, where we explore the all-encompassing love within us and all around us. I'm your host, Lauren Peters. Hello, I'm Lauren Peters, and welcome to another special edition of Omni Love TV Expert Interviews. Today, you're going to learn how to wire your brain to be a productive futures thinker, which is a critical skill set for the 21st century. So I'm really excited to introduce my friend and professional futurist, Frank Spencer, sci-fi geek and founding partner of KedgeFutures.com. And he's worked with companies such as Walt Disney, Procter & Gamble, Mercedes-Benz, and a whole slew of other companies. And Frank and I first worked together on a summer project teaching high school students how to use the same future-creating tools that we'll show you today. So Frank, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Lauren, and hey everyone at Omni Love. It's great to be with you. I'm excited, and as Lauren was saying, I got to work with Lauren, several years ago. It's been longer than I want to admit now that we worked together, but so it's always exciting to be with you, Lauren.
I am so happy you're here as well. And so normally what I do is I just jump right into it if you're ready.
Sure, I'm ready.
And so here is the magic question. Everyone is probably wondering, what is futurism, and how on earth do people use it in their lives?
Well, that's a perfect question, because all the clients that we work with, all the individuals that we coach, all the places that we go to around the world, this is one of the first questions that people ask. Of course, they ask it before they hire us, but it's an important question. And futurism has been around for a long time, actually. People don't realize that it's a quite old discipline. And actually, it's taught in universities around the world. You can get your master's degree, like I have a master's degree in what's called strategic foresight. My mom's really proud. You can get a PhD in it. But also, there's a lot of people that practice this just in companies or in their own individual lives to direct where they're going and how they think about the future. So futurism, in a nutshell, is the practice of really being able to intentionally and purposefully, with a set of tools, but also a philosophy, a way of thinking about the future, both the short-term and the long-term future, and then applying that future to today. As a matter of fact, I just want to say something I think your audience will really appreciate briefly. When we talk to clients, we always talk about the future being on a spectrum of time. And the one end of the spectrum is the push of the future, and the other end of the spectrum is the pull of the future. So a lot of people, when they think about the future today in articles on the internet or on TV shows that you might see, we often talk about the trends and things that are coming or emerging and how they're pushing or changing society or work or business or the way we eat or think or love. And we think about those trends are going to push us in a certain direction no matter what we do. So we have to, have risk management in our lives and make sure that we're paying attention to them and do something about them. But the thing that bothers me about that end of the spectrum is that's sort of the hair on fire part of thinking. Mm-hmm. The other end of the spectrum is the pull. And that's that end where we intentionally and purposefully can pull ourselves to the future. Or even more importantly, we can pull the future to ourselves. We can create the future that we want to see. And in futurism, or what we call foresight or futures thinking, we often talk about the desired or the aspirational or the transformational future. And so that's what I want to talk to your audience and to you about today, is how we can really transform ourselves and our future, both individually and collectively.
Awesome. You're speaking our language. So cool. Why don't we just do like a little example right now? For the push and the pull, let's use the topic of the future of love. And just very quickly, just to give us an example, what would be a push and a pull for the future of love and relationships?
Yeah, so of course, we talked about being, organic in our conversation, spur of the moment. So you put me on the spot here, but I think though it's a great question. And so the push of the future in terms of love is how we see relationships changing today, how we see people collaborating more, how people are changing the way that they have life-work balance, and what that means for families, for relationships, and those kinds of things. So we can go deep into all the trends that impact that. And that might be the push in. Mm-hmm. And so people think, wow, that's the kind of stuff that we relate to. Maybe your audience relates to. How do I balance my love life, my relationships, the way I think about love and connection with other people based on the way the world's evolving? That's really the push in, believe it or not. The pull in is something much deeper. And that is how we think about the way that we're evolving as a species, as humans, the way we think, the way that we do collaborate. Where do we want to go? How do we want to unfold the future? And so in terms of the future of love, we may be pulling ourselves to a redefining or a reframing of what it means to love, what it means to be in relationships altogether. And so I think that's some of what we might want to explore on the show here today.
Absolutely. That's pretty much what we're exploring on the entire show, period.
Awesome.
Awesome. So let's see here. I wrote down a really good question. So you and I talked yesterday, and I asked if we could talk more about this future of love and what love and relationships might look like. And I understand we can choose what this might look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or like 50 years from now. So we probably have to determine what that's going to be. Now, from your perspective, can you take us through your foresight process so that we can begin to create what this future looks like? So where do you suggest we start?
So one of the things that I would say right away is that in my field, working with companies, working on various different issues, but even larger issues like the one we're dealing with today that really impact where humanity's going, period. We often talk about scenario building. There's many tools in our toolkit, but scenario building is a part and parcel of the futures field. Now, a lot of different fields or companies or different ways of learning or thinking have used that word scenarios, and they use them in different ways. But in the futures field, which has been around for a long time, we're sort of one of the first fields to really use scenarios as the backbone of what we do. And the reason I mention that is because we like to think in multiples. So why that's important as a framework and as the process for really thinking about the future is we're used to, in the past, in what I call the industrial age that's passing away, instead of just the industrial age model that we all are aware of, but the passing industrial age. We're used to thinking in a linear process. So we think of the future as going to sort of unfold much like it does today. That 10 years from now will be slightly different than it is 5 years from now, 15 years from now, slightly different than it is, 10 years from now, but it'll still be somewhat of a walking forward, iterative, linear process. But the reality is that we live in a process, or we live in a world that is complex, very complex. And one of the things that I want to get across to your audience today, and we'll talk about in just a moment, is our relation with complexity going forward should be much different than it has been up to now. So the process of using scenarios can help us in that complex world because we think about multiple outcomes or multiple futures instead of just one linear future. And that gets us away from the push into this creative, aspiring, desired pull of the future, so that we look at multiple alternatives and we are able to pull from them and say, now we know how to navigate to where we want to go instead of just being pushed by the winds or the waves of fortune, so to speak, or by the trends, right?
Yeah.
So I think I was going to mention too that when we think about those multiples, we can think about complexity much differently, because the reason we get scared of the future, Lauren, is because we think that complexity is out to get us. The world's getting more complex and it's scary and I don't know what to do, so I need to simplify my life. And that's very important in this topic of relationship and love going forward, because we try to simplify everything. We want to cut people out of our lives. We want to simplify, what it means to be in relationships. And that only works on if we're being very complicated about things, but it doesn't work in terms of complexity. Because as I was already telling you earlier, complexity really is the natural order of the universe. Complexity is something that happens that shows that we're maturing. For instance, when we have a little baby and it grows up to be a teenager and an adult, it doesn't become more simple, it becomes more complex. Or when we look out into the universe, things become more complex, not more simplified. The reason that's important is because we can embrace complexity, and it actually will afford us greater opportunity to grow. And so love is going to become more and more complex. But that doesn't mean it's going to become more complicated. It gives us more opportunity to say it's going to change, it's going to be reframed, it's going to turn into something different, it's going to transform. And so we don't need to be afraid of the transforming nature of love and relationships as they go forward. We need to embrace that. And that is going to create a brand new future for us.
This is so exciting to hear you say. This kind of made me think, I'm going back to what you said about scenarios and creating multiple futures, or just even recognizing that instead of seeing your future as something that's linear, that something may happen. For instance, a lot of us say, I'm going to find my one, and I'm going to be with that one forever, and it's going to be happily ever after. That might have made sense at a certain point in our life, but as we realize that things get more complex and we have the opportunity to see it as multiple futures based off of our choices and decisions, we may end up with one, but it may not be the man or the woman that we thought it would be, because there could be up to 12 different futures that we just don't know yet.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And so along those same lines, and even going a little bit deeper, because I know we're just scratching the surface at the beginning of the interview here, and I'm the type that, the mind's just always rolling, and I'm thinking, what's next? So I'm already 4 levels down the path here. I'm thinking that it's not just a matter of even thinking about relationships that way, but you could read articles today on, and I'm not saying any of these are necessarily right or wrong or how it will turn out, but there's many different ways that going forward, relationships could even be defined in terms of having, multiple relationships, or marriages being redefined, or what it means to be in love is being redefined as we're becoming more collaborative, as technology and social changes redesigning what it means to have a brain, to be connected to other people. I did the global brain and social media or technology. And so it really is redefining the way we think, live, act, and relate to each other. And I think that changes the concept of relationship completely altogether.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said you're 4 steps ahead. What's the next step here?
Yeah. Well, I think the next step really is to think about what is emerging, or what is starting to unfold. And we can then take our sort of spectrum of the push and pull and everything in between that the future lies on, and we can think about what that means in terms of the trends that are happening today that are changing relationships and love, but also those emerging features that we might want to pull ourselves to, that is desired or transformational features. And so there are really 3 over the past year or so, different patterns or emerging futures that I've been telling our clients about, and that I think that your audience may be interested in as well, and that directly impact where we're going as a species.
Okay.
And so maybe we take a look at those quickly, and you can ask me questions about them, but the 3 patterns, and the reason I call them patterns is because trends, individual trends, like the trend of authentic relationships, or the trend of
the awakened couple,
or there's all kinds of different trends, right? There's so many of them. That's why I'm having a hard time really pinpointing which ones I talk about. There's this just idea of the sharing economy. If your audience doesn't know what that's all about, I think that's going to have a big impact on relationships. And that basically is the idea right now that we're sharing. Instead of everybody buys a bicycle in New York City, we have bike sharing services, or we're sharing actually wedding gowns and leaf blowers. And we're saying, everybody doesn't need to own one of these things. And we're sharing more and more things across society. It really impacts the way that we'll share in relationships, and we share in work, and we share, in talent and those kinds of things.
Is that technically a trend then, the sharing economy?
It is. It really is. And it started off as one little thing, and as every other trend, it's impacting other things. You think it would just stay, among sharing bikes and leaf blowers, but it's not. It's turning into how we share our thoughts and open access to information, and how we share workers across companies at the same time. There's new organizational models that we are barely playing with right now, but that are coming into fruition.
Okay.
And so what I was saying was that all of those trends collide, and they form these bigger patterns. Because in the real world, trends don't stay in isolation. This is the time of year, as a matter of fact, Lauren, near the end of the year, that we see all the magazines start to have their top 10 trend lists. And you'll have, the top 10 tech trends for 2016. And the top 10 fashion trends for 2016. And those aren't really all that helpful for somebody in my position, because the truth is all of those trends are colliding and meshing and converging, and that's what makes something important. So the three patterns that I'm going to tell you about briefly here are patterns that are of all these trends that are colliding that are really going to impact where humanity's going, and that impact our relationships and the way we relate to one another too. Okay. And so those three patterns are the creator economy.
I'm going to write these down. Creator economy.
Creator economy, what I would call the creator economy. The second is what I would call blurred reality, which sounds really sci-fi, and we'll get to that.
Blurred reality.
Blurred reality.
Yes, okay.
And then the third one is intentional evolution. Intentional evolution.
Intentional evolution.
That's right.
Oh my gosh, they all sound amazing.
They sound pretty cool, right? They definitely sound something that everybody would want to know about. And I often tell my clients a rose by any other name is still a rose. So you could name these patterns something different if you wanted to. That's what we call them at my firm. But they are names that are descriptive in such a way that it helps people to understand what's really going on. And so the first one, the creator economy, is sort of what it sounds like. Right now, trends, all these individual trends that are meshing and converging are pointing to the fact that we're more and more as individuals, but also collectively, we're creating in ways we never did before. As a matter of fact, I often say that we want our fingerprint or our thumbprint on everything that happens. And social media is promoting that, but social changes, new organizational models, the way that cities are being formed, new technologies, all those things are playing together to give the individual more power to say, I don't want to just buy something from this company. I want my fingerprint to be on it. I want to have a say-so in how it got created. I want to be able to go to their website on the internet and say, this is what I like about it. This is what I didn't like about it. I want to be able to go to Etsy and buy my product and not just a big company. Or I want to be able to go to Burning Man and be creative there and those kinds of things. So
yeah, so it's pretty much just saying it's having the empowerment to be able to just create whatever you want and when you want it.
That's exactly right. And can you see how powerful that is to the way I think about me as an individual, my career path, my relationship path, my life path? That's highly impactful. Before, I mean, not to say that people didn't always want that, but we didn't have the outlets for that. And today, more than ever before, we have these outlets, and I think it's scaring people a little bit too. We have a greater open outlet today to be what we want to be and do what we want to do. It's why so many people are even leading companies and becoming entrepreneurs today. And so when you think about that word entrepreneurial, it impacts not just work as we think of work and the way we frame that and define that. It impacts everything. Are we entrepreneurial in our life and our relationships and the way that we're molding and shaping our own self? And so it really, as you said, gives us the empowerment to do and be what we want to do and be. And there's so many trends that pour into that and that we talk about in all of our keynotes or our trend presentations. But that's that first big pattern. We're being empowered to create and to be creators of our own universes.
Awesome.
Yep. So I can talk about the next pattern if you want to.
Let's do that. Blurred reality.
And the next one is blurred reality. So you're going to see in a second that these three don't stand alone either. They all intersect with one another.
Okay.
And that's why they're so powerful. So blurred reality is really cool. One of my favorite, because today our technology that we're creating, but it's more than that, is blurring the line between what is physically real and what is digitally real. And as a matter of fact, it's even been shown scientifically and in studies that the brain cannot tell the difference between what we have traditionally considered to be the physical world and the digital or the virtual world. And it's even being said that those who think that the physical and the virtual or the digital are separate from one another are much like the old philosophers who thought the mind and the body were separate from one another. And so this is important because more and more we're living in these digital spaces, not just social media, but as virtual reality becomes more important, the Oculus Rift and augmented reality and what are known as mirror cities for some of your people that listen that might have played the Sims games that have been around for a long time. Now those are becoming a reality as we use that kind of technology to mold our cities and our living spaces and our environments. And so, and this goes on and on. As a matter of fact, there's a cute video online you can watch on YouTube of a 2-year-old baby that is given an iPad and just almost instinctively knows how to use it, because today children are growing up with that kind of technology. They take away the iPad, they give the baby a traditional magazine, and the baby swipes all over the magazine and doesn't know what to do with it and think it's that something's wrong. As a matter of fact, the baby even ends up looking at its finger and pushes its finger on its leg to see if the finger is broken. And it's very frustrated. And then they give the baby back the iPad and the world is well again. So this is that idea that when we're born with technology or when we're born in a new environment, it's not different to us. It's not separate from us. Mm-hmm. We often tell our clients, when you're born with technology, it's not even technology to you. Only those who weren't born with it is it technology to them. It's just a part of the environment. So today we're creating this environment where, and you'll hear the arguments, people aren't spending enough time actually, connecting in the physical world, and they're too, looking at their phones too much and off in this virtual world. But the reality is that both are important. And when you're born with that world, it becomes a part and parcel of your world, and it really blurs these worlds. So actually what it's doing is enhancing our ability to have relationships in ways we never could before.
Right, we're
it's enhancing our ability to, that's right, to talk to people on the other side of the world, to collaborate with people in new ways, to have ideas in our head that we never had before, because we're talking to cultures and ideas and philosophies that we never did before. And that's why we're seeing a convergence. So this blurred reality is not just about technology and people. It's also about the fact that we're blurring the line of our own multiple personalities, because it's been proven before that we all have multiple personalities. When I go to work, I put on a different face than the one I have at home and the one I have at school. But now, because the world's changing, we're expecting all of those personalities to converge. And we're blurring the lines between them so that we want to live all of our multiple personalities at one time and be one holistic person. And so you can see how that sort of jives with the creator economy and now this multiple effects or multiple ideas that we're seeing in blurred reality that is creating this whole new world of how I see myself, how I see my identity, how I define myself.
That's insane.
Yeah, it is insane, right? And then I'll just be short on the last one. But it is the capstone, and that's what I call intentional evolution.
Also, the third pattern, intentional evolution, that's what we're going to now.
That's right.
Okay.
And the reason is because it's the capstone of the three.
Okay.
It really speaks to the other two. It is made of its own distinct trends, but it's also the capstone of creator economy and blurred reality. Intentional evolution is a phrase that means we are now intentionally taking into our own hands our direction and our definition and our framing of what it means to be human and what it means to have human development, human growth and relationship. So no longer are we just saying this is the way it always was, and we're letting society define what it means to be in a relationship. We're letting society define what it means to be a person and to work and to have a family. But we're taking into our hands our own evolution. It's not just biological anymore. It still is biological, but it's now intentional. It's in our hands. And we're using not only technology to do that, but new social models, new cultural models, new work models, new ideational models, and relational models. And we're combining all of these things to redirect where humanity is going to our own desired future. So there's so much negativity in the world right now about things that are absolutely real. I agree 100%. Climate change and poverty and developing versus developed worlds and et cetera, et cetera. But really, the truth is that if we awaken to a new way of seeing the world, then we can turn all those problems on their head. And we can start to direct where the future goes, how to create that future. And that's intentional evolution. There's a lot of trends that make that up, but it's the capstone of being creative, blurring or being multiple, and now we're being intentional. And so those are the three big patterns that are redirecting where humanity is headed.
So I caught what you just said at the end. You talked about negative views on what's going on. And it's like when you have a negative view of what's going on, I feel like it hinders your ability to see it as an opportunity to turn it into something positive.
Yeah, you're speaking my language now, because it absolutely does. And the truth of the matter is they're now starting to show in studies that many of the problems that we have in the world, and they're real, I agree 100% they're real, but they actually are created by the viewpoint that we have about them. And here's the funny part, Lauren, I mean, everybody agrees with this, that we can't fix a problem by the same mindset that created the problem or that lives inside the problem. We have to change our mindset. And so what's going on right now through the creator economy, blurred reality, intentional evolution is a shift in mindsets. We're entering a new era of humanity. We're moving out of the industrial era into what I often call the human economy or the human era. Some would call it different things, the post-normal society, which is a big fancy name that means we're not in what used to be what we would consider normal. Things are post-normal now. We're moving into a new era of development for humans. And so we can create a solution to those problems by changing the way we view them. Mm-hmm. And actually, the way we have siloed away our disciplines and our answers to the problems and the way that we deal with things. Work is separate from our relationship, family is separate from technology, or whatever the case might be, actually creates those problems. The siloing has created our problems.
Our perfect little boxes.
Yeah, it's terrible. And so really the meshing that I already talked about, the converging of those different silos, breaking the silos down and converging all of them will give us answers to those things that have been problems for us. So you and I often call them wicked problems, very complex problems. Again, I've already talked about how complexity can be our friend. So what if complexity becomes an opportunity, wicked opportunities instead of wicked problems? And that's what we help people do a lot of time in futures thinking, is really to say, yes, we recognize the push and the pull. We recognize both risk and opportunity. We recognize both problems and solutions, but ultimately we want to find the transformational answer or the aspirational outcome or desired futures.
And so to kind of jump a little bit and apply that to relationships and love, sometimes the way I see this is when you're going through something and you're potentially in a long-term relationship and you're going through issues where your automatic response is to run away and say, this isn't me, this isn't aligning with what I want in the future. There is really an opportunity here to dig even deeper into your own patterns that you have yet to unravel and turn into the next level human being.
That's absolutely right.
So a lot of my work works with couples, and a lot of couples end up separating and divorcing, which is totally fine. There's no right or wrong there. However, I see an opportunity in a lot of these relationships to not end.
That's absolutely right. And I can't tell you how over the past several years, how many people that we've talked to either inside of a company, which this is always shocking to me, or that we've coached, because we coach individuals and couples as well. Obviously, our coaching is from a place of, we want to redefine what it means for us to work, or what's our next life choice, and those kinds of things. Or inside of a company, of course, we're working with large groups, and they're talking about culture change and strategy and those kinds of things, which are awesome and important. But oftentimes we'll find that an individual will come back to us and say, off the record, even though this was about strategy and my company and us developing new innovations, when I went to your training, it changed me. Because now I'm starting to think about how I can apply this to myself, and it's changing the way I was thinking about my career, my life, my relationships. And so this happens, of course, when we have done individual coaching or coaching with couples. Because again, they come in for coaching about strategy or work or maybe their education, and they want to apply these tools to their lives. And inevitably, it always causes them to redefine also their relationships with their families, with one another, finding their, a new relationship to be in, or expanding what they think about love. It doesn't just impact one area. It really changes the way you think about everything. We always tell our clients, futures thinking is a set of tools. It is a methodology, but more importantly, it's a philosophy. Yes. It rewires the way you think about the world. And so when you become a good futures thinker, ultimately you're becoming a human developer. It's the field of human development. And that applies to everything across disciplines, across domains, across spectrums. But of course, it applies to this huge place of relationships and ultimately what it means to be a lover of all things, and a lover of self, and a lover of others.
Right. And so one thing that we're talking about is opportunity and excitement about opportunity. And one thing, you guys, that I love about Frank, and if you can't already tell, like, we are like two little children running around in the opportunities. We're just so excited about everything all the time. And so this philosophy, from where I'm seeing it and how it might apply to you guys, is that if you can look at your relationship, whether it's good, neutral, or you think it's bad right now, and if you can kind of view it from a futures standpoint, what is your most ideal future and what are the different versions of that ideal future. If you can really focus on that with you or your partner or even your friends and family, because love spans beyond romance, right?
Absolutely.
When you take this philosophy of foresight thinking, how much more excited can you be when it's like you reverse engineer it. You figure out what you want, right? This is like a lot of the basis of life coaching. You figure out what you want and then you go out and get it. And then you be open to how the complexity is going to cause you to shift in certain ways you weren't prepared for.
That's right. I love that you talked about reverse engineering because there's a ton of tools, of course, that we use that are specific around that. It's true that one of the fundamentals of I think all coaches' practices or lives is that idea of reverse engineering something. In Futures, it gets a lot more specific because we want to find those monuments or those breakpoints along the way that will help you to reach those desired outcomes. And again, as I said, this doesn't just apply to our company's future and how they'll unfold. It applies even more specifically to an individual's or a group's or a couple's future and how that will unfold and how they reach those monuments along the way to really grow and mature. And so I couldn't agree more that its power is in finding that aspirational outcome and then working backwards to find those complexity breakpoints or those monuments along the way to reach and how to get to them, how to specifically set the course towards them. I even show our clients all the time sometimes a map of a boat, and it's avoiding icebergs and avoiding mountains, and it finally reaches the other side where it wanted to go. Along the way, there's these things that we have to migrate through, and Futures thinking helps us to migrate to our desired outcomes.
Cool. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. And what I want to do now is let's start coming up with different scenarios of what this future of love and relationships might look like. So how far ahead in the future do you want to pick?
Well, I actually, Lauren, you don't know that you just asked me an awesome question because all of our clients always say to us, look, when we think about the future, what is the balance between being plausible, which is more close to today, and being provocative, which you usually would think of being, further out. The more further out we get, we don't know what's going to happen, right? The closer in, we can take an educated guess. The further out, it gets to be a little bit more hairy. And that's why Futures thinking is so powerful, because there are methodologies and tools we can apply to say, we took away some of the uncertainty and helped you to understand, there's multiple possibilities. So with that in mind, we can go both close and further out because I think both will be helpful to your audience. Because if we don't get more provocative, then we don't understand the possibilities that lay before us. When we only stay too close in, we think again in linear terms. Provocative breaks us from the shackles of today and gets us to think about those possibilities and transformations. So let's do a little bit of both. And it would be interesting maybe if you threw something at me and then we can sort of riff on what the plausible future is and the provocative future is.
Okay, so just disclaimer, everyone who's listening right now, whatever futures we come up with about the future of love and relationships is not necessarily what's going to happen, okay? We're just playing right now. And the cool thing is you can take what you hear right now and you can apply it to anything in your life to just play. Put a bunch of inputs in there as far as patterns and trends, just like we talked about, and figure out what different futures you can come up with. So don't quote me 5 years from now and say that in the future we're all going to be dominatrix and like not have babies anymore. Like, we don't know if that's going to happen, but
we don't. We don't. Yeah. There are some educated guesses towards things that are going on. Lauren always says these neat things, and I know she's tricking you guys. She knows a little bit more about futures than she's letting on. I've worked with Lauren past, just working at Duke University a little bit. But we often tell our clients too that we're not here to predict the future. No one can predict the future, but what you can do is map it. And so we can intelligently, through analysis and research and trends and all these things, map the future, which is more important than predicting, because predicting is linear, mapping is multiple, and through multiples, we can be robust, adaptive, and transformative, which we can't do when we try to predict.
Awesome. So let's think about the future. I feel like 5 years is too soon.
Yeah, it's pretty soon. We usually tell a client start with 10 years. I put you in the middle somewhere. So let's think about maybe 10 years out from now when we're talking about relationships. And of course, I like to use a framework that we call STEEP, STEEP. I know that Lauren may be familiar with this framework as well, and it's just a framework. We've created different frameworks for different clients, but a framework in futures thinking helps us to be robust in our thinking so that we don't stick to just one area. So STEEP, S stands for social.
Well, hold on. I want to go ahead and say we're going to do 10 years, and then what's the second one so people know what to look out for in the end of this?
Yeah, let's go out there a little ways and go, 30 years out, somewhere, 30, 40 years out there. We'll go sort of crazy. And then you guys that are listening can think what's in between, what's in the middle.
Okay, and let's say we're already on like almost 40 minutes, and I'm kind of thinking this might be a two-parter just to tease you guys a little bit. So yes, absolutely. Let's start with 10 years, and then you're now talking about a framework that you use, which is called STEEP.
I do, because I am, and because I want to give your audience something that they can work with as well. Like if I'm in a room with technophiles, technologists who just love to think about nothing but technology all day, then I tell them don't think about technology at all, because I know you're already good at that. Let's think about S, social, T, technological. Yes, that's important. E, one of the E's is economic, another is environmental, and P is political. And so, one of those probably speaks to you more than the other four. Different people that are listening today, all five probably hit somebody somewhere. But it's important that you think about all five, because that makes you a robust future thinker, adaptive, transformative. And in reality, things that are going to impact our relationship or the future are going to probably come from an area that we didn't expect. So we have to be robust in our thinking.
And when you mean robust in your thinking, you mean this framework. If we were to take social, this means let's figure out what's going on in the world right now in terms of the social realm. What type of information can inform our 10-year future stories?
That's right.
And then what's going on in the political, like for instance, Trump is running for president, and is that going to affect the way we love 10 years from now? We don't know, but it's so fun to think about. So that's for people who don't yet really know what STEEP is. That's kind of how we use this tool.
That's right.
And I'm saying we, like I'm a futurist. I love it.
Well, you've done it. You've done it. You're our honorary futurist, Lauren. So, but that's absolutely right. And the reason I say that is because I know as we start to talk about this, all of those different facets are going to come up. And somebody might say like, wow, you guys are all over the map. We're doing that on purpose, right? So one of the areas that I think is easiest to hit, that's why I already picked on, is this technological realm. Mm-hmm. And I've already sort of talked about it a little bit. If you listen to what we already said, I hinted at some of those things. Because in terms of where the internet is going, and this concept too that we call the Internet of Things. And if you've never heard of that before, you will, probably sooner than later. Because what it basically means is that right now, Laura and I are talking over Skype and recording, and we're on the internet. But more and more, we're living in a world where the internet is in everything, and it's all around us. It's in the Coke machine on the street. It's connected somehow to social media or the internet. The roads will be connected to the internet and tell how many cars have gone down it, when it needs to be repaired, how much electricity is going in. Our buildings connected to the internet. You get the idea. Everything's connected to the net. So we no longer go to the net. We live in it. Well, how will that impact, the future of love and relationship? In a huge way, because as things like facial recognition come into play, and big data knows all of the information about us, what we like to wear, where we like to go, who do we like to see, what do we do at night, it directs our relationship towards other individuals, towards who we'll collaborate with, who we talk to, what we like, who will like us, and et cetera. And we see that today in the creation of apps, in the iTunes store and those kinds of things. And so only 10 years out, that's going to play into our relationships and the future of love more and more and more. Because this kind of technology and big data is not only directing us maybe in what some might see a scary way, but it's helping us to really understand what's out there that we didn't know about before.
Right.
Who's thinking in ways that we don't think like, and who can we relate to in ways that we didn't know that we relate to before we sort of left it to fate. Now we're being more intentional about the way that we relate to one another.
Yeah. So for instance, in technology, and I'll talk about what's currently going on, Tinder. Huge, right?
Huge,
There's
right?
a bunch of Tinder-like apps, but just online dating in general is something that we didn't have like 15 years ago. And so that's just an example of how technology has shaped our future today. And what we're talking about right now, the internet of everything, the internet being in everything that we do right now, how will that change in 10 years?
Yeah, it's going to change drastically. I really believe as a futurist, and now I'm starting to go out a little bit further, but we'll be careful not to do our 40-year yet, that our cities are becoming, or will need to become, and we will try to make them into generative spots or spaces. And the word generative means life-giving. So before we've shaped where we live and where we relate to one another and where we work and where we meet, we've shaped those sort of as machines. And we get up every morning and we go out to serve the city and make its water work and make its wheels turn. But really, we're starting to see that the city can be the answer to a lot of our problems. So they become generative spaces. So now we start to build the city to serve us instead of us serving the city. And what does that do when it's connected to the net, to this neural network of ideas and brains and relationships and cultures? It completely changes how we will relate and connect to one another. What will define his work and his relationship and his family and his life. And so that means the city becomes a hub of being able to live instead of just a place that we live. Okay. It becomes the hub of how we learn how to relate to one another, which is ultimately the basis of how we love, right? How we connect and how we love, how we think, how we relate to one another. And so I think the word city becomes more and more synonymous with human. Mm-hmm. And right now, city means, a problem. It means pollution. It means, people can't find work, and we relate to those ideas. We're going to reframe this word city to really, over the next 10 years, mean innovation. City becomes synonymous with ideation and creativity, and it becomes synonymous with relating and collaborating. Mm-hmm. And that's huge because the internet and that technology, of course, is the connector or the glue for all that to happen.
That's awesome. Okay. My head is spinning on that one in such a great way. I just love it when things like merge like that. City just becomes human. And I'm a very future thinker, and I'm very visual at the same time, and just the two concepts mixed in my brain just now, and it's beautiful. It's like I want that to happen tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, and to get crazy for a second, this is where your audience can go, wow, Frank is pretty nuts. Let me look this guy up and see.
Okay, let's do it.
What happens when cities fall in love with one another? And what I mean by that is when cities are connected to one another in the way that we're talking about, when the Internet of Things connects us in a way we never thought of before, cities start to become these hubs of brains, of collaboration. And so St. Louis is known already for a certain thing today, but as it becomes more of a generative place to live, or maybe even becomes a bigger or a different kind of city, how does it relate to and have a relationship with Miami and Los Angeles and so on? And so it's not just at this micro level of Lauren and Frank, but it's at the macro level as well. Both are legitimate. Yeah. But what happens at this macro level when places have a relationship with other places instead of just individuals having a relationship with individuals?
And then, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's some signs of that happening right now, in a sense that LA and New York are very, very connected. You've got celebrities and a lot of other business people, they've got two homes, one in LA and one in New York. And that's right. So I totally get that.
Yep. It's a pretty far out idea, but it gets us to start thinking about how do we redefine relationship. And I think that's one of the big things that we need to think about.
It's so big. I'm like, my host head is like, how do I put a magnifying glass on this without talking about the entire world of everything? Yeah. It's true. All right, let's move on to a different one in that framework, steep. We talked about tech. What's another one that you think is going to drastically affect the way we love and the way we define love?
I think that economic is a huge one as well. Because, again, when we hear the word economic, we think of money and work and paying our bills and those kinds of things. And, of course, that's absolutely right. But economics is changing drastically, too. We talked about the creator economy and this idea of the way that we now buy and sell or barter and share or create local economies so that people are relating to one another in a more holistic or healthier way. It can drastically change the structure of the family, or this idea of, dare I say, the legal marriage, even, for instance, and what it means to need to be connected in a legal framework because really the reality is a lot of our relational frameworks have been based from the industrial age on legal frameworks or contracts. And we all know, everybody really knows that relationships are organic. They're not mechanistic. They're organic in nature. And so as our economies become more holistic and organic, and we talk about buying and selling and trading and bartering and collaborating and sharing in more organic ways, then it drastically changes the way that we will define contracts and relationships from a contractual standpoint and look much more organically to relationships. How do I really love? What's the time frame of my love? Is it like a fishing license? Do I need those kinds of contracts to define who I am in a relationship anymore? And I don't, and it totally changes. Not just that micro level relationship, but then what it means to be in a family and to be in this world of a relationship of love and connection and partnership in a way that we never thought of before.
I love that you mentioned that because, I have a bunch of friends who are, and I'll just use the words that we use today. It's like monogamous or polyamorous, or they don't know what they call themselves, or there's something else. And we really are starting to see that, this contractual thing that worked so well in the industrial age, and it worked for the economy, it worked for coupling together and building a family and insurance and all of that. Like, we're asking ourselves, I buy into tradition. I respect my tradition. However, what is working for me right now and what is going to work for me in the future? As opposed to my own agency of love, like how I want to love people and how I want to be free and not have to put labels on it. It's shaking up all of these labels and these traditions. And like I said, I respect all of it. And I'm also so fascinated by exactly what you just said. How am I going to love? Who am I going to love when? When it starts to feel weird, am I going to come up with my own new version of what that is? Or am I going to fall back on what people says it is?
That's right. That's exactly right. I think about, and this is sort of a side offspring of the idea that we're talking about right now, but this the growing concept of agender or genderless society or genderless, relationships or genderless individuals, and that might not be for everybody, but today we see that becoming more and more and more of an accepted concept because at its root, if you really investigate it, you understand it's not about I feel like I was born with a female body, but inside a male, or vice versa. It's not just about that. It's about much more than that. It's about really being holistic in your being. As a matter of fact, I can honestly say, and being sort of open and honest with your audience today, that I've always seen in myself a lot of feminine characteristics. But as a male in this society, I've felt like I often have to keep them bottled in. And more as I'm getting older, I decided I'm not going to let people do that to me. I'm going to let these feminine characteristics that want to come out of me that are supposed to naturally be a part of all of who we are. We all have what we might consider masculine and feminine and something in between characteristics, the entire spectrum, right? And I love speaking to your audience because I know that, you might primarily see women coming here, but I think men, will come to Omni Love as well. You probably have a mixed audience. And this gives me a platform to say that I've always believed that we're moving more and more, and this is a part of that future as well, part of the S, the social part, that you're going to see the feminine become a larger part of everything we do and defining what we do. The feminine is going to play more into work. The feminine is going to play more into our technology development, the mores part, the empathy part, the deeper understanding level that we need, not just that surface level, which has traditionally characterized the male dominance in society, but doesn't have to. And we're going to see a greater holistic balance between the male and the female. So that's a part of it too, just this genderless or agender or, cross-gender aspect that we're seeing that is changing society, that's changing not just the way I see myself or the relationships I might be in, it's changing the way we'll work and live in cities and define, everything around us.
Okay, so I'm going to add on to that. And I was trying so hard not to jump out of my chair and just start jumping up and squealing because I just love this topic. you talk about like masculine and feminine becoming whole, and us redefining the way that we live and love based off of that. And so that kind of made me think of like the Eastern and Western traditions and religions and thoughts, like just not necessarily merging, but taking the best parts of both that work with us and turning it into what it's going to be in the rest of the 21st century and beyond. And so like, what part of the framework would that pattern be?
I really think that falls under the social in a large way. Of course, like I said, again, this is a very broad framework, and we might want to give that a different header. But it's definitely under that social category where we think about what does it mean for us to evolve culturally? What does it mean for us to evolve as a species, the way we relate to one another, and those parameters we put on that, the structures, so that we understand the world. As a matter of fact, we often ask our clients two huge framing questions. And one is, in this new world, in the world of the future, what new cultural ideas will help you make sense of that world? And then what structures do you think will be built in that world that will help people to make sense of that world? And so one's huge, it's this new cultural idea that we're entering, this new world that we're forming. And then there's structures that start to, bloom up from that, like, daisies growing up from the ground, that help us to make sense of that world. That's always going to be the case. But as we become more holistic, more convergent, and we embrace complexity more, then we start to have this convergence of these ideas that have been siloed before, female versus male. We're entering a world where female doesn't verse male anymore. It's a convergence of the two that gives us a new space in between. And this is a part of my work that I find very exciting. It's not just male plus female equals male-female. Mm-hmm. No. Male plus female equals something new that we need to discover and explore what that means. But it's a new space. It's not just a convergence of the two. It's not addition, it's multiplication. It's far beyond that.
Cool. What have we pulled out? We pulled out Internet of Everything. We pulled out generative cities. We've pulled out masculine, feminine, Eastern, Western, holism. Did I miss anything there?
I don't think you missed anything in what we talked about so far. And like you said, I think this sounds like it might be a two-parter or a three-parter. Yep. It's not as much as you'll have me back on the show again. But of course, we're just scratching the surface now, because now we're starting to get to an exciting place where we talk about new forms of relationship, new forms of virtual relationship or machine relationships, and how that actually, not just man to a machine, but how that sort of helps us to have relationships with one another too, and changes what it means to connect to one another. Is it a male, female, or female, female, or male, male connecting to one another? Is there other possibilities? Are there other parts of the equation that we're not considering? Yes, there are, I think. And as we move forward in the future, those become something that's going to have a huge impact on what love and relationship means to us.
Yeah, you're going to have the primary method of orgasm just be with God.
Yes, completely, right? And that coming and playing into our relationship and how that redefines things. So there's all of that.
I feel like we could totally stop it right there for this interview.
I think we probably have to stop it right there.
And I'm going to go ahead and say, holy crap. Like, we obviously have a 2 or 3-parter interview on our hands, and I couldn't be more excited about where this is going to go. You're right. We just scratched the surface, and we haven't even really gotten into the scenarios yet. No. What we've done, if you're kind of confused right now, is that we defined that we want to look at the future of love and relationships. And then we are going to look 10 years out and then see what 40 years out looks like. And mind you, in 10 years and 40 years, there are multiple futures, multiple scenarios that we may come up with. So what we've done on this interview is we used a framework called STEEP. And you can look that up on the internet, STEEP, and futures. Right. And we started to look at what's going on in the world right now. And we pulled out certain trends and patterns, and that's what we've been talking about. So one of them was how eventually, well, today we serve cities, how eventually cities will serve us, how gender and identity is changing and merging, and it's like mixing around and turning into new things. We talked about masculinity and femininity and that turning into something new. I mentioned Eastern and Western traditions and turning into holism. And so that's pretty much what we did scratched the surface. We didn't even get to scenarios yet. So I'm going to go ahead and end this here. And I want to say, wow, wow, wow. Thank you again for being here on the show for your first one. I'm so glad to have you teach us about how to use futures and foresight in our own life.
Well, you can see that I get pretty excited about it. And all of these things that we've talked about here today are important in almost any realm or any client that I talk to. But I'm so happy and blessed to be on your show, Lauren. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so where can we find you online, and how can we potentially reach out to you or work with you eventually?
Yes. So working with me would be going to our website. And of course, I'm not the only person at my company, Kedge, K-E-D-G-E. And you can go to my website and learn all about what a Kedge is and how it helps us to pull ourselves to the future. Kedge Futures, so K-E-D-G-E, Futures with an S on the end, because there's not one future, there's many. KedgeFutures.com. That's where you can find me online, and you'll see all about our services and companies we work with and clients and what we do. But Lauren, you can also find me on Twitter, so that because I love to play on Twitter and share articles and ideas and concepts there. So you can find me just at Frank Spencer. I have a very easy Twitter handle. And of course, you can find me on Facebook and on LinkedIn as well. You can find me in all those different places.
At Frank Spencer.
That's right.
Okay, and you have this thing that we haven't talked about, this wonderful program called the Futurist School. Do you want to talk quickly about that?
Yeah, really quickly, and we can mention it again if you'll have me back on the show, is the Future School. And you can also find this at thefutureschool.com online. It looks like it's separate from Kedge, and it is, although, of course, it runs under the auspices of our company. But the Future School is a growing program that we've done in over 23 countries around the world. We now offer it to the public. It's a 3-day, very intensive, immersive, project-based, hands-on, get your hands dirty program to teach people how to be futurists in their company or in their own lives. We've had 2 now this past year, 2015, one in Orlando, Florida, where I live, and another one in Los Angeles, and they were both huge. We packed out the classes in each one, and they've been tremendous. And in 2016, we're going to be holding the Future School in Miami, in Los Angeles, and in the Sydney Opera House next summer for us, but winter in Australia in August 2016. So you can find us at thefutureschool.com.
Perfect. Well, I am so happy, like I said, that you came here and talked to us about futures. And for anyone who's still listening, you need to get prepared for part 2 and potentially part 3. Seriously. And so I'll see you guys later. Thanks for tuning in to Omni Love TV.